The 49ers have a lot of key and important players on their defense. But who is the absolute X factor that makes a difference for this 49ers defense, especially in 2024? We'll talk about that next. This episode of 49ers Cutback.
From the alley-oops at Kezar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. I want to talk about X factors and who will be the biggest X factor for the San Francisco 49ers in 2024. And when you're talking about X factor, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I think X factor has certain definitions. So when we're talking about it, we need to know what definition we're talking about, because if you're talking about X factor as being the best player on the team or best player on defense, there's only a few guys that could potentially be named in that, and it's obviously going to be the usual suspects, right? Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, maybe Mooney Ward, depending on what position you like. So an X factor, a noteworthy special talent or quality. Special talent, that would be Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Charvarius Ward. Those are guys who just do it at a different level than everybody else. And so, yeah, they're X factors on every single team. And you play Madden, you know, there's X factors and those guys who are just going to make impacts for your football team. But that's real in the NFL. You have guys that are X factors for your team. But what about a different type of X factor and a different type of definition of, not talking about the normal, usual suspects of Bosa, Fred Warner, but how about this definition? A variable in a given situation that could have the most significant impact on the outcome. So, a variant, something that's not on the beaten path, a player that maybe is going to be an X factor, not because they are as elite as Nick Bosa or Fred Warner or even a Talanoa Hufanga, but because they're going to have a innate ability to make a play on this football team. And they're going to be an X factor because their play is going to determine the strength and likelihood that this defense is going to be successful. And so that's what we're going to be looking at on this episode. We're going to go through some players. We're going to talk about them and how they could potentially be X factors for this 49ers defense. And then by the time we get to the end of the episode, we're going to land on the player that is the biggest X factor for the 49ers in 2024. Will it be Nick Bosa? Will it be Fred Warner? Or will it be that second definition of a variant? One of these other players we're going to talk about. We're going to get into all that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Also, why we're doing it, let me know in the comment section down below who you think the X factor is for the 49ers. Do you think just one of those elite players, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner? That's okay. If that's what you think, it's one of those guys, it's Mooney Ward, or do you think it's going to be a variant? One of these other guys we're going to talk about. Maybe you think it's going to be Diameter Lenore. Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm really interested. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know every time a new video comes out or I go live. I always really appreciate your help with just getting the content out to more people. The more you like it, the more it goes out to other 49er fans so they could check out the content as well. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads, all the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. So this is always a intriguing and unique conversation because normally when people talk about X factors, they're just talking about the most important player on the team. But sometimes the most important player on the team is a known variant. And maybe you have unknowns that could actually make a bigger impact overall because you have expectations of what you're getting from your star players, from your normal X factors, but you don't exactly have an exact expectation of what you could get from somebody else. And the key is if they can make an impact on your team, they can become an X factor that ultimately helps your star player make a lot of plays. So that's where I'm kind of taking this conversation as guys who could be X factors for one reason or another. And so I'm actually going to start this conversation with Talanoa Hufanga. And the reason that I'm going to start it with Hufanga potentially being an X factor and the biggest X factor for the 49ers in 2024 is once he was injured last season, the 49ers run defense really struggled. The defense just wasn't as good. They weren't able to make those tackles. Jair Brown didn't tackle as well as Hufanga, even though Hufanga wasn't the normal Hufanga tackling. But Jair Brown missed 10% of his tackles last season. So the 49ers need a player that can step up. Plus, you just look at the position. You got Jair Brown going to year 2, and I think everyone, including myself, is highly optimistic that Jair Brown is going to step into the role and be very successful, that he's going to elevate his game over what he played in his rookie season now that he's got an understanding of what the speed of the game looks like. He's played in the system. He's got a lot of ability to feel comfortable now in his coverage schemes and where he's supposed to be in his drops and how offensive concepts look, route concepts, spacing, everything could take him to another level. But what do you have behind that? You have new rookie 4th round pick, Malik Mustafa, and I think we're all optimistic about Mustafa, but I don't know about you guys, but I'm not ready for Mustafa to be a starting safety right now. I want him to be able to learn, to read, to get better. I don't want to go through the same rookie mistakes that we got from Jair Brown last year, the rookie mistakes we got from Talanoa Hufanga in 2021. I want a player that can sit, listen, learn, and then when it's his time to shine, step in and make a play. I think it's tough to count on a rookie starter at the safety position in today's NFL, especially when week 1 is going to be against Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. But then also you got George Odom, and I don't think anybody thinks George Odom right now is a starting caliber safety in the league. I love that Coach Nick Sorensen said he's been getting a lot better. He's been in the system now for 3 years, so he has a true understanding of it. I think that's good because he did have good play in Indianapolis before he came to the 49ers, but he's missed tackles, which wasn't the norm for him in Indianapolis. And then he looks like he struggles sometimes in coverage. So I think the 49ers have to hope that Talanoa Hufanga is going to be back and ready to go. If not, you take a step back at the safety position. So that X factor alone of him being off the field last year and the 49ers defense not being the same, I think is extremely significant in him potentially being the biggest X factor for the 49ers in 2024. So when does Hufanga come back? If it's week 3 of training camp, will he be ready for the season opener? You would expect so. But what are we going to get from Hufanga as well? Are we going to get the Talanoa Hufanga from 2022? All-pro Talanoa Hufanga? Are we going to get the Talanoa Hufanga from 2023, early part of the season, that struggled sometimes in tackling, that didn't look as dynamic as 2022? Or are we going to get a whole new version in 2024? I think that's a big question. And because of that question, he could be a huge X factor because of the position he plays and the players that are behind him. So Hufanga definitely on the list as a potential X factor on this team. Next up, Leonard Floyd. And Leonard Floyd is coming in. He's a veteran around this league. He averages 10 sacks a season over the last 4 years. And he's a model of consistency. And why could he be an X factor opposite of Nick Bosa? Well, first off, he averages 10 sacks per season over the last 4 years. The 49ers' best sack number actually came from Eric Armstead in 2019 opposite of Nick Bosa, when he shared some of his snaps on the interior when he would move inside on obvious pass downs and they brought in D Ford. So legitimately a guy that plays outside the entire time. The best sack numbers the 49ers have had was in 2019 with D Ford, and he played in 11 games. The 49ers just haven't had a significant edge rusher opposite of Nick Bosa since he was drafted in 2019. They've tried. They brought in Samson Ebukam. And Samson Ebukam was good, but he was never able to get over 5 sacks in the season. They brought in Charles Omenihu. Charles Omenihu wasn't able to get more than 4.5 sacks, and even he was using that Arden Key role to kind of go between outside and inside. And so the 49ers have been looking for this dynamic guy. Last year, they traded for Chase Young, and Chase Young had 7.5 sacks in the season, but not with the 49ers. Most of those sacks were with the Washington Commanders. So 49ers are looking for that guy. And to think when they had D Ford in that season and when he was healthy, it looked like that was a complete X factor for that football team. D Winner changed the game for the 49ers defensive line. D Ford. When D Ford was playing, people took notice of it. They had to worry. His speed rush was elite. His ability to get to the quarterback made everyone on that defense better. Defensive line was able to get more one-on-one looks. They were also able to get a quarterback who had been flushed out of the pocket. It was just different. The time that the DBs had to cover was less. It made it easier for the linebackers to be able to cover running backs in space. Everything was easier with that guy. So imagine having a guy now that averages 10 sacks that can not just win with a speed rush, win with a power rush like Leonard Floyd, but be consistent opposite of Bosa. Could it be the same X factor you got with D Ford? That guy that makes everyone else better. Because if he's successful, he's going to make Bosa better. If Bosa's better, if Leonard Floyd is being successful, that means it's going to make it easier for Hargrave. It's going to make it easier for Malik Collins and Jordan Elliott and Kevin Givens and Yetur Gross-Matos. And all of a sudden, you've got guys that can make plays because this one guy is able to live up to that role that you need him to be. If he can come out there and do that, he could be an extreme X factor for the San Francisco 49ers in 2024. He might flip the defense completely with the way that he plays, just being a consistent force. And that's one of the differences between a young guy you're looking to get production out of and a seasoned veteran is consistency. Consistency is what you need. That ultimately, knowing what you're going to get play in and play out is more important than a couple of splash plays per game. Because consistency means you're winning more plays than you're losing. Splash plays mean you're winning big time sometimes. And that's your worry. You got to have consistency, and I think he's going to bring that. He may be the biggest force opposite of Bosa since D Ford, and he's a guy who normally stays healthy. So that's a good sign for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, a guy that's starting to pick up a lot of steam, 49ers, podcasters are talking about him a lot, media members, is Isaac Yiadom. And I've talked a lot about Isaac Yiadom as well, and he could be an X factor. And here's why. Ambry Thomas last season was expected to step in and be cornerback 3. And when he got out there in certain situations, he struggled. Go look at what happened to Seattle. DK Metcalf catching touchdown passes over him grabbing and getting physical and creating big penalties that gave non-necessary first downs. He just struggled a lot when it came to how he played the game. He was very grabby. He didn't look very solid when it came to running or run stop ability and coming up and playing the run. He wasn't a great force defender in some situations. So the 49ers needed to upgrade from Ambry Thomas. And they go out and they get Isaac Yiadom. And Yiadom has been around the league since 2018. He's a veteran that's been around. But when opportunity struck in New Orleans last year, started 8 games and had 14 pass defenses, that is fantastic. And now you come to a team that led the league in interceptions with a motto of get that ball, and the ball's the most important thing. Coach Nick Sorensen used to handle the ball meetings. Now he's a defensive coordinator. That's going to be on the forefront of everyone's minds is turnovers. And Isaac Yiadom got his hands on 14 footballs last year. If he can turn those into interceptions and go from being a guy who knocks passes away to making interceptions, he might change the game completely for the 49ers defense. Because what were we talking about just a little while ago? Charvarius Ward used to get his hands on footballs, but couldn't turn them into interceptions. Last year, Charvarius Ward went from getting his hands on footballs and not having interceptions to having interceptions, and he became an all-pro caliber player. So Isaac Yiadom you can look at in a similar light. He could potentially make plays for this defense. And if he can stabilize, and not even just stabilize, but make an impact and be an X factor as cornerback 3, he could make the 49ers defense take a whole new step forward, because all of a sudden that extra second of coverage, good coverage, means the 49ers pass rush can get home. Quarterback can't get rid of the football as quickly. All of a sudden, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 aren't necessarily good situations for the offense like they have been before. 3rd and longs could mean the 49ers have opportunities for turnovers. Those turnovers breed in points for the offense. So that X factor of him being able to step in as cornerback 3 could be huge for this 49ers team. If there was one weakness in the 49ers secondary last year, it was definitely cornerback 3. And Ambry Thomas had moments where you're like, whoo, that looked good, but it just wasn't consistent. If he can add consistency, Isaac Yiadom could be consistent and allow Deommodore Lenoir to play that nickel position without fear of them getting beat on the outside and losing matchups to key wide receivers like Puka Nacua or losing to DK Metcalf. And he could start winning those matchups and slowing down these opposing offenses to allow the defensive line to get home. He could be an extreme X factor, especially if those 14 pass breakups turn into 4 interceptions. Then all of a sudden he's making a huge impact on this team. Something Deommodore Lenoir actually needs to get a little bit better at too is get your hands on the ball, make the interception. He did get a couple turnovers that got robbed from him because of penalties by other players, but you got to make sure you take advantage of those situations. Now, another guy who could be a huge X factor for this 49ers defense, and I think he was more on the forefront of people's minds last year because the 49ers signed him to a huge contract, is Javon Hargrave. And Hargrave is now the guy that's expected to step up and be that number one guy at defensive line. Even though he got the huge contract last offseason, I don't think anyone saw him as the guy on the interior defensive line. They saw Eric Armstead as that guy, and Hargrave was coming in to be his running mate. Well, now Hargrave is the guy. Malik Collins and Jordan Elliott have been brought in to be his running mates. So now there's an onus on Javon Hargrave to go out there and make plays. And a lot of people will tell you his 7.5 sacks were disappointing. I think because of injuries to Eric Armstead, him only playing 12 games, and Hargrave dealing with different injuries, whether that was a finger or other things, he definitely didn't have the amount of success stat-wise as people were expecting, paying him what they were paying him. But 7.5 sacks from interior defensive lineman was still a really good season for an interior defensive lineman for the 49ers. They haven't had anyone come close to that. Armstead is the guy that normally gets those sack numbers, but there was a year where the 49ers had 3 sacks from the interior defensive line. Like, that just can't happen. You have to make sure you have those guys that can make the play. And if you're going to have Bosa and you're going to have Floyd bringing pressure from the outside, you need guys in the interior that can bring pressure. Javon Hargrave has to be that guy. Can't allow a quarterback to get pressure from the outside, step up into the pocket, and be able to deliver the football on time and with the proper footwork to get the ball where he wants to get it. You want to make more turnovers? Get in that guy's face. You want to get sacks? Collapse the pocket from the interior, getting a push or getting pressure to the quarterback's face. That's the best way. So it's important for Hargrave to make sure he does that. So the San Francisco 49ers know they need Hargrave to make plays. And if Hargrave, the better he plays, the more double teams he sees, could open it up for Leonard Floyd or for Malik Collins. And those guys get opportunities to step in and make plays. So Hargrave, even though he was brought in last year and could be deemed an X factor last year, I think he's extremely an X factor this year, because if he plays up to the level he played in 2022 and he gets 10 sacks, imagine that. You get double-digit sacks from Bosa, double-digit sacks from Floyd. That's what he's been doing. Double-digit sacks from Hargrave on the interior. What kind of effect would that have on the rest of the defense? It could be really, really exciting. So he might be a big X factor for the 49ers in 2023. The biggest one, we'll see. We're going to decide that in just a moment. Now, a couple of guys that I just talked about, and we'll start with Malik Collins. Malik Collins could be a X factor for the 49ers because right now you've lost Eric Armstead. You've lost all that production. And even though he only played in 12 games, he still had 5 sacks. Well, last year, Malik Collins played in 16 games and had 5 sacks. He played 4 more games than Armstead, but didn't have the sack numbers. And Eric Armstead's just a freak of nature. The length, the athleticism, the lateral quickness. Also, the technique with his hands and the arm over move. There's just something different about Armstead compared to a lot of players in this league. That's why they called him the blueprint. But Malik Collins is definitely not expected to play up to that level. Most people think this is going to be a step back. And what are you going to get from Malik Collins, I think, is a big question. But we talked about it. Armstead got 5 sacks. Imagine if you could get 7.5. If he could equal Hargrave's number from the year before, and Hargrave could go over double digits, well, then that could change the game. But where another area that Malik Collins could be an X factor for the 49ers is run defense. 49ers have struggled to stop the run, especially last season. Teams were able to take advantage. Teams like the Cleveland Browns were able to run the football down the 49ers' throats. And that's not the norm. The Detroit Lions in the NFC Championship game ran the ball down the 49ers' throats. And that was with Armstead on the field. And we know Armstead wasn't healthy. He had a torn meniscus. Hargrave wasn't healthy. He had the messed up finger and other things that he's dealing with. But you have to be able to stop the run in this league if you're going to have an opportunity to win. Malik Collins could be an X factor if he can stop the run and still get after the quarterback, even a half of what Eric Armstead did, especially when it comes to pass rush. Armstead has had seasons where he got 10 sacks. Malik Collins could come in and get 5 sacks like he's been doing in his career. That's his career high. He could be an X factor or do something different for this football team. Now, if he has even more production than that and jumps it up 7.5 sacks, well, this team might end up being elite. Now, success by Hargrave and Floyd and Bosa could definitely contribute to that, but he has to be a worthy participant because we've seen the 49ers have guys that can get pressure and other guys just get manned up. They get soloed. One guard can block a defensive tackle, and then that makes everybody else less effective. So it's going to be very important for Malik Collins to do that. And for Jordan Elliott, his X factor is the run. His most sacks he's had in a season is 2.5. But stopping the run is what he's been brought here to do. It was the same case in 2021 with Hassan Ridgeway. And that's what you need. You need that guy that can step in and stop the run. You need that guy that can step in and make a play. Because the 49ers run defense has been lackluster, especially last season. They were just giving up too many yards on the ground, too many short yardage first downs. Now you bring in Jordan Elliott, and he's a legitimate run stopper. Talking about a guy that wins at 40% of run stop reps, which means he's 12th best in the NFL stopping the run from defensive tackle. That's who you went out and got. And he's going to have to be an X factor in that dynamic because nobody else plays the run at his level at the position. No one. Not your starter, Javon Hargrave or Malik Collins. They're not as good a run stopper as Jordan Elliott. Not Kevin Givens, who's going to be his running mate on the second unit. Not Kalia Davis, right? Not Evan Anderson. And I know Evan Anderson is one of people's favorite guys, but he's not a run stopper like Jordan Elliott. I haven't seen it on film. Maybe he will be at some point, but I haven't seen it yet. Definitely not T.Y. McGill. The 49ers need Jordan Elliott to stop the run. And if you need run defense, he could be an extreme X factor for this football team stopping the run. So you see right there, 3 defensive tackles. Don't you think a defensive tackle is a question mark? Even though it looks good, just have to make sure you see it on the field. And all 3 are not just potential starters, but potential X factors for this football team. Very interesting. One more player to mention before I go over who's the biggest X factor, and that is Devondre Campbell, who I'm going to talk about, because Campbell has to fill in for Dre Greenlaw. And Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner together are the best tandem of linebackers in the entire NFL. But Fred's going to be out there riding solo without Dre Greenlaw. So Campbell's been brought in, and he's going to have to step into that role. How long is it going to be? The first 6 games, the first 8 games, the first 10 games? We don't know for sure. But Devondre Campbell needs to play well. But here's why he could be an elite X factor for this 49ers defense. Is if he plays to his 2021 capabilities, 146 tackles, and he gets that potential all-pro type level of play early on in that season, he's just tackling everything. It's a guy who doesn't miss a lot of tackles either. Only 3% missed tackle rate last season. Talking about the 49ers run defense getting better. He could help. He gave up 72% completion rate on passes last year, which isn't elite, But just for notice, Trey Greenlaw was at 70%. So not a huge drop-off considering what you're getting from Campbell. Plus, he's been around the league. In his own words, too, he's already learned so much about himself at the position from Kyle Shanahan by explaining how they attack him and what offenses are trying to do to manipulate him. So Devondre Campbell's learning. Here he is, played in the league all this time, been in the league since 2016, and he knows more now, learning from Kyle Shanahan in 6 to 8 weeks, being with the football team. Don't tell me that can't help him be an X factor. He might be a huge X factor for this team. If he can step up and he can play that high-level football that they need him to play, he can slide in there next to Fred and not make you forget about Dre, because you're never going to forget about Dre. Anyways, sorry, I went full Eminem there. But don't forget about Dre, but be a guy that can step in and at least not make you think about it every single day. Make you say, all right, when Dre gets back, we're going to have the best linebacker core in the NFL. And so I think that Devondre Campbell could be a huge X factor, especially early on in the season before Dre Greenlaw gets back. If he can hold us over and he can play up to that level that he's potentially able to play, he could make this 49ers defense front seven feel really strong. And Jordan Elliott helped with the run defense, Devondre Campbell helping with the run defense, and maybe the run defense gets better. Deommodore Lenoir being in year 2, playing the nickel full time, step up there and make some plays in the run fits. Isaac Yiadom helping on the outside a little bit better than Ambry Thomas. Leonard Floyd setting the edge a little bit better. So 49ers definitely have some potential X factors, especially when we're looking at it as a guy that is a variable in any given situation that could have the most significant impact on the outcome. And you know who's going to normally have the most impact on the outcome? Your star players. When the biggest moment strikes, they make a play. But it's often influenced by one of these other guys. So I went through that list of guys. Hufanga, going to be an X factor of some sort. Leonard Floyd, Isaac Yiadom, Javon Hargrave, Jordan Elliott, Devondre Campbell, Malik Collins, and they're a good list. But I'll tell you who I think is going to be the biggest X factor for the 49ers in 2024. And I think it just makes everyone better if he plays well. And it's going to be Leonard Floyd. And I know that, it's easy to say Bosa or Fred Warner, and those guys are going to be X factors all the time. But an X factor, and could be the biggest X factor, is Leonard Floyd for this reason. You have not had a pass rusher opposite of Nick Bosa that can do the things that Floyd can do. And if Floyd has the amount of success that he's had over the last 4 years, even if he gets 9.5, 10 sacks, it will be the most dominant pass rusher the 49ers have had opposite of Bosa's entire NFL career. It will be a guy that will make every single player better because you already know what you're going to get out of Bosa. You already know what impact he's making on offenses as far as protection scheme and setting the edge. But with Leonard Floyd, it changes the game. He becomes an X factor because the way he plays and the way that offenses have to approach him being there makes everyone else better. From the interior defensive line of Javon Hargrave and Malik Collins to the linebacker room of D. Winters, Devondre Campbell, and Fred Warner, to the secondary who no longer has to cover as long, gives them opportunity to jump more routes. You don't have to worry about vertical passes, quarterback being able to be back there for 4 or 5 seconds, and all of a sudden they're having to make a decision after 3. That's when you start seeing turnovers. That's when you start seeing even more big-time plays for this defense. So I think that Leonard Floyd is that X factor. And I think he's going to make a huge impact on this team. So that's how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at him as the potential guy that can get it done. Adding that 9.5, 10 sacks could be huge for the San Francisco 49ers in 2024. I think it makes Bosa better. I think it makes Fred Warner better. Now, those guys, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, Talanoa, Hufanga, they make everyone better. And so could potentially Leonard Floyd. But he's the guy I targeted in this one. Let me know who your biggest X factor on defense is going to be for the 2024 season. I'm really curious to see who that's going to be because I think it's just interesting. It's always a fun conversation to have. Guys have to make impacts, and the biggest X factor is a big part of that. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe. This episode was brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. And remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.